This camera's not turned on. Oh, it's down, I suppose.
Yep.
Oh, he's all right. Okay. Welcome everyone to tonight's council meeting for Monday, the 23rd of August, 2021. And we are being live streamed and we're all on Zoom. I'd like to start with the opening prayer and acknowledge the country. Lord, we ask that you guide us in our decision making, protect us and the community we serve from all that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. Amen.
Amen.
I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. I must inform that this council meeting is now being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at the council meeting that you are respectful to others and use appropriate language. Obviously accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of the council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations. I've received none. Disclosure of political donations. Mr. Zacknich.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly, the advice to the council meeting under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Section 10.4 requires a person submitting planning applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation it or gives to any local councillor or employee of the council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. There are no development applications to be dealt with at this meeting, so the advice ends there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zacknich. Apologies, Sam Fall. An apology from Councillor Cameron, and I note Councillor Furley is missing at the moment, so happy to accept Councillor Cameron's apology. Councillor Vanderman?
Yeah, happy to move that the apology from Councillor Cameron is accepted and leave of absence granted for the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury?
Second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Thank you. Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. There are no more minutes. CM6 action plan 6.1 to 6.4. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. To move the recommendation as a motion that the following action plans be received and noted. 1, actions complete for noting only. 2, actions awaiting response from external parties. 3, actions in progress. And 4, long-term issues more than 3 months. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, I think I saw yours there for a moment. Yep.
Yeah, happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken, did you wish to speak to that at all?
No, I'll retain my right of reply, reserve my right of reply, but ask if there are any questions of councillors.
Thank you. There does not appear to be any questions at this point. So Unless you're happy to close the motion, maybe put the motion. Do you wish to close the motion, councillor Clacken?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, how to put the motion? All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Okay, CM7, confirmation of minutes of the previous meetings. Minutes of the council meeting held on Monday, the 9th of August, 2021 at 6 p.m. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the minutes of the council meeting held on Monday, 9th of August 2021 at 6 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you. And the seconder is councillor Clacken.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Okay, there appears to be no question or debate, so I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? Beautiful. Those green cards look fantastic. Okay, there are no reports from community forums. CM9, notices of motion. 9.1, notice of motion. Councillor Stutchbury, shelter for the homeless in Albury. Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to put that motion? You're on mute. Thank you.
I do wish to put it. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that council staff investigate and report back to council a proposal to create a shelter for the homeless of Albury.
Thank you. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to second that, but I'd actually like to propose an amendment to this motion for the mover to consider, if I may.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'd like to amend it to that council staff investigate and report back to council options for investing in and or facilitating additional crisis, social and public housing in Albury.
Thank you, Councillor Con. Councillor Stutchbury, are you happy to accept that amendment to your motion?
I do accept that amendment to my motion, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
The mover and the seconder are comfortable, happy to take a question before we have a debate, Councillor Stutchbury?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Vanderman, you've got a question?
Yeah, Mr Mayor, through you, just we had this last year in August where I think it might have been Councillor Stutchbury again, or moved the notice of motion and then changed it prior to the meeting, tried to change it. We had some advice around that. And I don't think the amendment to the motion is actually anywhere close to what the original intent of the motion was. So I'm asking for a ruling from you in terms of whether you believe that this change to the notice of motion by way of an amendment is appropriate, or that we go back and it's only going to be maybe a fortnight at the most. We've still got plenty of time in this term of council to deal with a revised motion, but I think that there's a lot of extra elements introduced in the amendment that were not in the original motion. And I, for one, would like to have a chance to see what our staff have as in terms of response, in terms of a CEO note with regards to the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. Just Mr. Zachnich, you spoke with Councillor Stutchbury today about this particular item.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. So I did circulate the email clarification from the last discussion around notices of motion and timing of any amendments prior to the meeting or at the meeting. So ideally, the process would be that the published notice, public motion given in the notice would be moved and seconded. There'd be debate, and then a process of amendment could take place through the chair in the normal way, either with the approval of the mover and seconder or otherwise. So just a small step to be included there. That's possible in terms of following that process based on that earlier advice. But through you, Mr Chair, you're able to proceed in that way. That would be acceptable.
Thanks, Mr. Zachnich. Mr. Zachnich.
So just to follow up, Mr Mayor.
Yeah.
Yeah, so follow up, Mr Mayor, just on that question then. So can we go back then to have the debate rather than having the amendment moved before any debate's had? Thank you.
Yeah, look,
Point of order, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Stutchbury.
We all appear to be assuming that Councillor Van der Ven is correct in his assertion. The two motions are in fact substantively very similar. They're not different at all. And I don't think there's any need to go through this additional bureaucratic maze of steps. The two motions are almost identical, with just some very slight wording changes.
Councillor Salisbury, just looking at the two motions or the amendment to the motion, one talks about shelter for the homeless and the other one talks about crisis, social and public housing, which homelessness, public housing, social housing, crisis housing, there's four different levels of housing and four different level of clientele, one could argue. But just for the purpose of the procedural nature of the meeting, I'm happy for the original motion to be debated and then the other item be added or proposed by Councillor Con and seconded by someone else as an amendment to this motion. So I'd like just for now for you to open debate on your original motion and then I'll accept an amendment after that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be reasonably brief. A couple of weeks ago, Councillor King circulated a photograph of the belongings of homeless people who were using the wood-fired pizza oven at Norriel Park to either live or sleep in. And the genesis of my motion was that it was felt that cleaning up the homeless people so that other users of the wood-fired pizza oven could cook their pizzas in peace and quiet seemed to be an important thing. And it struck me that realistically, the most important thing we could be doing here is in fact improving accommodation for the homeless. I think that if council staff are prepared to spend $750,000 of ratepayers' money on a wood-fired pizza oven, then council staff or councillors might also be interested in spending some money on proper housing for the homeless so that they don't upset users of the wood-fired pizza oven and also have access to a higher quality of accommodation than one would expect to achieve at a wood-fired pizza oven. It's really just a question of social justice. It's very nice to have a pizza oven down at Norriel, and Norriel's going to look beautiful when it's redeveloped. But realistically, I think that we councillors and we as a society are judged ultimately on how we look after the vulnerable amongst us rather than how schmick our wood-fired pizza ovens are. Now, as part of the process of researching this notice of motion, I did have a look at the Albury City policy for the homeless. I also had a look at the New South Wales state government policy for the homeless, because obviously there will be some contention tonight over which level of government is in fact responsible for looking after and housing the homeless. Now, Albury City's policy focuses on the prevention of homelessness rather than the housing of the homeless. Now, I would agree 100% that it's very important to attempt to prevent homelessness, however difficult, if not impossible, a task that might be. But I think it is also impossible. It is also important for us to consider housing the homeless whom are already amongst us. You can go onto Google and try and find out how many homeless people there might be in Albury or in Albury-Wodonga or in New South Wales or in Australia. The numbers vary, but in my view, if even one person is homeless, then we should be trying to offer decent housing for that person. The New South Wales state government policy for the homeless, it's a rather more complicated document than ours, but in essence, they are focusing on prevention as well. However, they are also offering in the current iteration of their policy, which goes from 2018 to 2023, so a 5-year period, the construction of 120 social housing projects 90 of which were to be constructed in the Greater Metropolitan Sydney, and the remaining 30 to be constructed in regional New South Wales. I made some inquiries of our senior executives, and it would appear that Albury City is not going to be the recipient, or is not yet the recipient of this largesse from the state government. So therefore, I don't think that it's reasonable for us to expect that anytime soon the New South Wales state government is going to build us a homeless shelter so that we can look after the homeless amongst us. Therefore, I think we should cop it on the chin and stump up the money and build or get involved with other organisations in building or improving shelter for the homeless as it stands right now. So that is, in short, the genesis of my notice of motion, and I would now like to hear with great interest the response to that from my fellow councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Salisbury. It was very short. Question from Councillor Doxey. 2 speakers against and 1 speaker for. Councillor Doxey, question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Salisbury has referred to a photograph circulated by Councillor King. I, and I'm sure other councillors, have not seen this photograph and any information that's gone with it. Can we be included in the discussion with that in relation to that, please?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Doxey. Just for your information, I did report this issue well before it was noticed by Councillor King to the staff. And the background of this particular issue is not as simplistic or simple as it would appear in the debate of Councillor Salisbury, but that gentleman and his partner that were down at the Woodfire Oven were reluctant to take available accommodation. So that's the first point that needs to be rendered there. But anyway, no, happy to, if there are photos, happy to access those photos and provide them with those photos. But at this point, the debating is about whether we should provide homeless shelters for the homeless. Speaker against, Councillor Vanderman.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'll try and be a bit briefer than Councillor Salisbury. The CEO's note on this particular issue is in fact very telling, and it backs up the policy that we've got in terms of prevention rather than providing housing for the homeless. And even though the state government appears to have put money aside for 120 social housing projects, I don't think that actually addresses the homeless situation. It's social housing rather than homes for the homeless. So in the CEO's note, I take great comfort from the fact that, yes, Unlimited is the lead agency for specialist homeless services, and their policy is, again, prevention rather than seeking to provide more shelters for the homeless. Now, from my perspective, I'd rather see us spending money on assisting with that prevention than actually putting bricks and mortar together to provide shelter for the homeless. In terms of the $750,000, yeah, by all means, yeah, we could afford to do it either by supporting actions to prevent homeless or providing the shelters. But I think that we need to be trying at the source to try and prevent the homelessness. The other issue for us is we should be advocating to the state government that if there is going to be a situation where we're going to try and build homeless shelters, that our regional area be, you know, one of the first, as one of the largest regional centres in New South Wales. And by all means, would be happy to support any funding that they came up with funding of our own to try and do that. But I think don't think we should go it alone. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vander. I have a question from Councillor Gluckin and a speaker for with Councillor Con. Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the most relevant member of staff. In one of the papers that we were sent by the staff as a background paper with reference to this, it referred to the impacts and knock-on effect of major infrastructure projects currently being undertaken in the area. And I'm conscious that when the freeway was being built, the old motels along Wagga Road were heavily utilised by those by people undertaking work on the highway. And I'm wondering if the council staff have been able to discuss future possible use of such motels along that area for short-term homelessness accommodation.
Thank you. Mr. Ferris, or is that your dominion, or is it Mr. Miller?
No, Miss Code or Miss Squire.
Miss Code, where's Miss Code? I can't
Miss
see
Squire.
her.
Yeah.
Miss Squire.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for the question, Councillor Glacken. Look, no, I wouldn't say we've actively done that. What we have done is worked with the YES agency in particular. They do access a range of different accommodation, excuse me, to support people that are finding themselves in a homeless situation and give them temporary accommodation. So they certainly would access some of those existing motels or caravan parks to provide that support. But we haven't certainly sought to investigate specifically what you're talking about, no.
Follow-up question, Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you again, a follow-up question. Can I ask through you to the most relevant member of staff, my understanding, or preface it with, my understanding is that the aim, the objective is to find temporary accommodation to deal with homelessness, to then enable the homeless to be able to go back into other accommodation, so that in essence that it is for a temporary period of time. Can that be confirmed, please?
Thank you, Ms. Squire.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, that's correct, Councillor Glacken. That's the objective. It's to provide short-term temporary accommodation until more permanent arrangements can be made for that particular person.
Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker 4, a question from Councillor King now. Councillor King.
Thank you. Just a question to the relevant member of staff. We've seen this homeless policy or strategy from the council. If someone rang the council switchboard tonight and said there's some homeless people looking for somewhere to stay, and it went through to our after hours numbers, can you run through what the procedure would be on a council perspective of taking that call and how that would find them some temporary accommodation?
Ms. Squire.
Thanks for the question. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Our first step in the process would be to either check on those people with our rangers, but then more importantly, to contact Yes Unlimited, who is the support service provider for homeless people, and to work with them to check in on that person and see if we could encourage them to transition into temporary accommodation.
Yeah, follow up. So at 6:30 tonight, if someone rang, you would call out the ranger, and the ranger would go out to where these people are, and all this process would happen, in a wintry August night on a Monday night.
Ms. Squire.
Thanks, Councillor King, for the question. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think it would depend on the circumstances, and I'd have to take on notice the specifics, but it's certainly, if we had a call from someone in the community around someone in distress, we would make an assessment of what the situation would be and then make a determination as to how best to deal with it to make sure that that person was supported.
I've just got another follow-up. I'm not sort of talking about distress. They've got nowhere to live and they're living on the riverbank, and it's 6:30 at night and it's raining and they're wet, and they say, hey, we need you to help these two people who are living rough. What procedure does a council do tonight, if it was tonight or tomorrow night, to enact the strategy that we've been going through for the 5 years that I've been here about all this talk of how we're committed to homeless help and looking after people who are vulnerable. For tonight, as an example, or tomorrow night.
Would that not be the same question that was answered before?
Well, it
Asked and
didn't.
answered.
Well, I don't know. Would you call the Rangers out? That's the question. Would people go and help those people tonight, or will they stay in the rain and the wet and the cold tonight and wake up in the morning in their same spot?
Yeah, through Mr Mayor, that Ms Squire did answer the question. But again, the offer of support would be on the condition that the individuals are happy to accept that support. This is a complicated situation, not as straightforward as being portrayed. So we would certainly follow our protocol that councillors are aware of, as Ms Squire's indicated, and seek to support those individuals. Again, they're not obligated to accept that support. They can continue to do what they're doing. We find it difficult to move people on. The police may get involved, as has occurred in recent circumstances. So the process we follow is a difficult one, but our people do endeavour to provide the support. And where it's accepted, hopefully that's successful. But again, these are often long-term situations that need to be resolved and the support provided as you suggested. And that's the response we do take. We take that responsibility very seriously. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Zachnich. Speaker 4, Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Firstly, wanted to commend Councillor Stutchbury for putting this issue on the agenda for discussion. I think it's critically important, and not just because of the recent incident at the pizza oven. Albury-Wodonga has some of the worst rates of homelessness in regional Australia. This is an issue that's been getting worse for some time as the town grows and has been particularly exacerbated by COVID over the last 18 months. So I think it is critically important that we have this discussion. And it's unfortunate.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. Point of order, Mr Mayor.
Who's calling a point of order?
Point of order. Me.
Councillor Vanderman, your mouth wasn't moving.
Thank you. Councillor Con has suggested that we've got some of the worst homeless figures in the state. Where does she get that information from? Please provide us the proof that we are in that worst situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. Councillor Con, are you able to answer that question?
Yeah, I think that's more of a question than a point of order. I'm happy to provide that to Councillor Vanderman tomorrow by email. I haven't got it in front of me. I'm familiar with those statistics in my role as chair of the Border Domestic Violence Network. Yes, Unlimited, who's our local specialist homelessness service, is a member of that network. And I recall being presented with those statistics recently. So I'm happy to find that for you, Councillor Vanderman.
Councillor Vanderman, happy for Councillor Con to provide that information by email and other councillors tomorrow. Councillor Con, continue.
Thank you. I'm hopeful that now that the original motion has been moved and debate has been opened, that I'll be able to move the amendment that I did previously, because I do think that the scope of this motion ought to be expanded. I think it's important for us to remember, amongst all of the procedural fuss that was made, was that this motion is requesting a report, and the amendment is requesting an expansion of the scope of that report. There's been dollar figures floated around. This motion tonight is about us requesting information about how we can address a critical issue. And I think there's consensus among the councillors that have spoken so far that we do have a responsibility to prevent homelessness in Albury. And that includes exploring any available options to facilitate crisis social and public housing.
So
We've talked about
your amendment. Are you proposing your amendment?
Yeah, sure. I can propose it now. That council staff investigate and report back to council options for investing in and or facilitating additional crisis social and public housing in Albury.
So I take that's an addition, or that's a proposal to replace the existing motion?
It's intended to replace the existing motion, noting that the option of a shelter would be covered under crisis accommodation or crisis housing.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Stutchbury. Yeah, continue, Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We've had a discussion tonight about temporary accommodation. A temporary accommodation is valid for 28 days, and the complex reasons that lead to a person becoming homeless are typically not addressed within 28 days. And the problem is that there's simply nowhere else to move people to from temporary accommodation, because the wait time for public housing in Albury at the moment is between 2 to 4 years. One of my patients as a GP is a gentleman with chronic mental health issues. He's got a cognitive impairment and a number of chronic medical conditions. He lived in a caravan park when I met him. Like many people who suffer mental health issues, he was self-medicating with alcohol. He waited for more than 2 years on the public housing waitlist and finally got accommodation. He's now sober for nearly a year. He's taking his medication every day and he's engaged in meaningful volunteer work. And finally, getting into public housing was what made the biggest difference to that gentleman's health. When we've got people waiting 2 to 4 years, no amount of crisis accommodation is going to solve that problem. We need public and social housing. I think there are a number of ways that council might be able to facilitate that or invest in that, in particular how we can support our existing service providers to do this, noting that it's a specialist social services provision, and it's not necessarily the answer for us to run a shelter ourselves. I'd like for the report to consider all of our options. But I think, when this is a council that's happy to acquire land and facilitate investment in, for example, industrial estates, we should absolutely be considering the option to facilitate investment in public and social housing in this community so that we can get people not just out of the cold, but into meaningful accommodation that will make a difference in their lives in less than 2 to 4 years. I hope that fellow councillors will support this motion, which again it's asking for a report. It's asking for more information so that we can come back and consider this issue again and what we should do about it.
Thank you, Councillor Con. Right on the 5 minutes. Question from Councillor Thurley and a speaker for after that. Are there any speakers against? Councillor Thurley, question.
My question through you, Mr Mayor, to a member of staff. I'm utterly confused right now. We had a notice of motion from Councillor Stutchbury, which we were told had to be voted on, and yet we've now slipped into the an amended motion. I was prepared to speak against Councillor Stutchbury's motion, not because I oppose the sentiment, but I wanted an amended motion, and I thought that's what we're speaking on. So can I have perhaps Mr Zachnich tell me how we've slipped from the original motion to now an amended motion without a vote?
Through Zachnich.
Thank you for the question, through Mr Mayor. So the published motion provided by Councillor Stutchbury in his notice of motion was moved and seconded and is in the process of being debated. Councillor Con has since moved an amendment to that motion, which is able to happen under the meeting procedures, and seconded by Councillor Stutchbury. So at this point in time, through Mr Chair, the councillors are debating an amendment to the original motion, which, if it does receive support as an amendment, will then be put as the motion, and then the resolution will be set from there in the normal way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Zachnich. Better said than I could have said it. Councillor Thurley, there appears to be no further speakers against, but happy for you to speak for. And I've got
yes, I did contact Councillor Stutchbury over the weekend and indicated that I would not support his original motion, but the sentiment is something I totally support. And given Councillor Con's amendment, I'm very happy to support it. I'm very wary of state governments shifting responsibilities and shifting costs and such like. And I'm also very aware that we have a reasonably good approach to homelessness in Albury, but we can always get better. And I do agree with Councillor Con that the matter is getting worse. COVID has certainly exacerbated the whole situation. Homelessness has been an issue here ever since I've been on council, and it wouldn't be the first one that we've had difficulties with down in the Noriel Park area. But I believe that anything we can do to augment, add to, improve what we presently do should be done. It's tough out there, and there are people for all sorts of reasons become homeless. It's not just layabouts and dropouts. Lots of people become homeless for all sorts of reasons. And if anything we can do in partnership with organisations and the state government, then we should have a look at it. And so Councillor Con's motion is very worthy of support. It asks for reports, it asks for information so that we're better informed to make decisions, and I totally support it.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Fairley, speaking for the amendment. Speaking against the amendment, Councillor Glycan, did you wish to speak against the amendment?
I'm speaking against the original motion and slightly against the amendment, but somewhat in support as well.
We're dealing with the amendment at this point. So did you wish to confine your debate to the amendment?
I can absolutely do so. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
So the amendment has one area of concern for me, and that is with council looking at providing provision of shelter. Now, I appreciate entirely that Councillor Con and Councillor Stutchbury have requested a report, but their report is to look at council assisting with the provision of infrastructure. And I don't have the actual wording in front of me because that's not on the screen and it's not the original motion in our paperwork. So I do apologise for my inaccuracies. Thank you very much. That council staff investigate and report back on options for investing in. So my concern is with investing in. Now, I'm very happy for us to be looking at facilitating and working with other government agencies to do so. I'm conscious of the fact that Albury City Council should be and does actually work proactively with other more directly relevant agencies to better support homelessness, both the prevention of as well as on the when it does occur with assistance to mitigating that situation. But my concern is that where would we stop if we were to take on responsibility, as Councillor Thurley has made reference to, taking on responsibilities from the state government? Where would that end? We have less public transport provision in Albury than they do in the capital cities. So would the suggestion be that we would take on greater responsibility and provide infrastructure for public transport? What other roles and responsibilities of other agencies and levels of government do the councillors wish us to take on? Do they want us to work more closely with the hospitals, take on responsibility, provide infrastructure there? I appreciate that we do have a role to play, a significant role to play, but that is supporting and assisting the other lead agencies and the government levels of government who have the greater responsibilities. So I am not entirely comfortable with this motion as we now have the amended motion. I am supportive of almost all of it. It is simply that the motion does refer to us taking on responsibility for infrastructure provision, which I don't support. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Glycan. Speaking against the amendment. Speaking for the amendment, Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'm voting for the motion. There's been a lot of talk about getting involved in other projects from Sydney. You know, I don't think there's any problem with the Albury City Council actually taking a lead role in looking after our vulnerable people and not relying on state governments. This is a very, very serious problem when you have human beings out in the cold and the wet and hungry and disorientated. We get a lot of reports and strategies which never really come to fruition where we actually do something. So, you know, having a strategy about homelessness is just the paper it's written on, unless you actually go out and work towards in a not an instant, but a timely manner, that you don't say, hey, we'll just go and deal with these people who are living rough, you know, on Thursday, because that's our roster when we drive around. And if we can't find these people living under the bridge between 1 and 2, we'll come back the next Thursday. And I've got an RDO on. You know, this needs to be a 24/7 response to people who are living 24/7 and struggling. And certainly we've gone a lot off topic of what Councillor Stutchbury's aim was. I did photograph the poor conditions of the people in the shelter, and whilst it's a wood-fired pizza oven, it could have been any shelter in Albury. So the fact that it just happened to be our brand new wood-fired pizza oven, I think, is irrelevant. And I contacted the mayor about this 3 months ago and said these people are living rough. And here we are, 3 months down the track, with all these great strategies that we have and all these feel-good things and all these great words, and the people are still living out there. So if we can take a lead on this and do it and get it done in a timely fashion, that's what I'm all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. Just to correct you, I think it was only about 3 weeks ago, but not 3 months. So,
point of order, Mr. Mayor. I'll send you the text if you like. It was 3 months ago. Thanks,
Councillor King. You can call a point of order on me, but I've got the email in front of me.
Am I allowed to do that? Right.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Con, there appears to be no further speakers for or against the amendment. Did you wish to close debate on the amendment? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Con, that's not Councillor Con.
Go on, Councillor Con.
Apologies, Mr. Mayor. I thought that I'd amended Councillor Stutchbury's motion and then it would still be Councillor Stutchbury's motion. I'm happy to
we're dealing with the amendment. If the amendment is won, then it becomes the motion. If the amendment is lost, we revert back to the original motion, which was Councillor Stutchbury's. So we're getting a little bit confused about amendments and motions here. So we're dealing with the amendment right now.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Mayor, but the mover and the seconder accepted the amendment. So my understanding was it would just become a motion.
Incorrect. We were debating the original motion. You proposed an amendment to that motion, which you moved and Councillor Stutchbury seconded. So it became an amendment, which we've just debated. And are you closing debate on the amendment now?
That's fine. I'm happy to close debate. I don't think substantially more needs to be said. I hope that fellow councillors will support this amended motion so that we can have another better informed discussion in the near future about what we can do as a local government level on this really critically important issue.
Thank you. So we're putting a vote on the amendment. Thanks, Council. Those for the amendment, raise your hand or put your forward card. Those against? The amendment is carried. So now that the amendment becomes a motion, Councillor Con, is there any other speakers for this motion? Okay, I'm happy to put the amendment as the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, Councillor Con. Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury and councillors. We have the second motion from Councillor Stutchbury, the review of environmental factors reports included with agenda papers. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this one's a little bit more straightforward than the previous.
Can you move it first so I can get a seconder?
I will move it right now. I move that all review of environmental factors reports be attached to the agenda papers for the particular proposal so that they may be easily accessed by councillors and interested members of the public.
Thank you. Seconder, thanks.
Seconder. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, can you open debate, please?
Yes, I'll be very brief. As we saw with the recent agenda item for resurfacing or modifying the road to the tip, not having a review of environmental factors made quite a big difference to that whole affair, and it proved to be a critical element of the entire discussion, and in fact ended up altering the scope of the project. Reviews of environmental factors are critically important for councillors to make reasonable decisions about proposals, and also interested members of the public. And so I think that these reports should be easily accessible and not hidden away somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Any other speakers for or against this motion? Thanks. Doesn't appear to be. Councillor Stutchbury. Did you wish to close debate, Councillor Stutchbury?
No, thank you. But there is a question.
There's a question from Councillor Glacken. Thank you, Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Sorry, it took me a little while to pick the card up. I couldn't get my hand under it. My question is that my memory is that the General Manager sent an email this week saying that that is council policy, that it would be attached. Is that new policy? Is it something that the staff have instigated? What was, if there's a few councillors shaking their head, if the General Manager could explain, please, what the intent of that email was, and is it or is it not council policy, either was or is it now?
Mr. Zaklich.
Thanks for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. So the note relates to the notice of motion that's been provided with the business paper. So the proposed action is to include the reports of environmental factors with those reports, as is currently the case with development applications, was the point I made in the CEO note. So adding REFs to other reports, tenders, other proposals and the like, where which would be covered by this notice of motion, or this motion, should council resolve to endorse that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or debate? No. Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Unanimous. All those, anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. CM 9.3, notice of motion recognise climate change as a significant issue. Councillor Thurley. You're on mute.
Thank you. I move that council staff prepare a report within 3 months outlining what actions have been taken since the motion moved on the 25th of May 2020, recognising climate change as a significant issue impacting the social, cultural, economic and environmental health and wellbeing of our community, and B, detail any potential legal and financial risks to council which may arise as a result of climate change.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Happy to second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, I have a question before we open debate. Is that okay?
Yep.
Councillor Glacken.
Actually, it's probably better if Councillor Thurley open debate. I'm happy to ask it now. It's really, if this motion was to get up, I wanted to ask the staff if they could also include in any such report further information, or information going back further to when council started looking at environmental impact and environmental footprint, and to include in that report, not just back to 2020, what advances have been made, what impact council has been able to make on the work or the impact of the environmental footprint of Albury City Council, but also our community as well. Thank you. I do apologise, Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Mr. Zaklich, do you wish to speak to that?
Well, through the Mayor, it's additional information not covered by the motion. So if there's additional information required, as we've seen with the earlier motion, it needs to be part of the motion that's essentially endorsed by council. Having said that, we got to that May 2020 resolution with all that information provided. So it is background that already exists in place.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to open debate?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Basically, I moved this motion because the IPCC report came out and it really does show a deterioration and an increasing rate of change. And I believe that we really need to get stuck into what we're doing. I was happy that council passed that motion in May last year. And I believe that there are a number of very positive steps that our council has taken. For example, our hard waste program, our community energy fund for solar panels, LED lighting in our street lights, use of energy efficient motors in our pumping stations. All of these are great moves. What I'm asking for now, given the IPCC report, is an update and a look at what else we can do. But the other issue, and this is an issue which comes up, for example, in audit risk and improvement, we face risks if we do nothing. Water supply and security is an issue. Heat waves are an issue for the elderly in our community. Insurance risks on our assets are a big problem. And these are all exacerbated by climate change. So what I'm asking for is a year on from that original motion, what have we done? Where have we got to? And where are we going? What actions have we got in progress or in store for the future to look at this issue of climate change? It potentially can cost this council a lot of money. We've already made a lot of steps to mitigate the issues, but there's much more we can do. And I believe that we need to do this. We need to be a leading council. Water security for us would not appear to be an issue, as it is for many New South Wales councils. But one of the things that I would say, and it's been made clear to me from a number of conferences I've attended, is that we are not one of the most economical water users per household in the country, in New South Wales. We can do better, and I would like just to see our staff prepare a report which looks at all of these issues through the lens of climate change, because I think there are positive benefits for the council, including reduced costs and looking at risk in the future, which is something that, as a member of the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee, I'm reminded about every time we meet. So I commend this motion to my fellow councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. No further questions. There's a speaker for Councillor Con, two speakers for Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very happy to speak in support of the motion, and thanks again to Councillor Thorley, who's put it back on the agenda. And I agree. I think since this council adopted an amended corporate success pillar that included our ambitious and achievable carbon emissions targets, a number of positive things have happened. And it would be really beneficial, I think, to see all of that progress in one place, to see how far we've come already and what further things we've got to go. And I know some of those things have been already reported back to our Sustainability Advisory Committee, which Councillor Thurley does chair, and that includes things like our community energy program, which has been really popular and well received. So that was funding solar panels for community groups that lease council premises. Obviously, the LED lighting upgrade has saved council significant amounts of money. I know we're looking at a power purchase agreement. We're looking at electrifying the fleet. I think compiling all of that work into one place so that we can see that progress and identify other things we can do to avoid that risk in future, as Councillor Thurley said, is really important. So very happy to support this.
Thank you, Councillor Con. Councillor Stutchbury, you're speaking for, no speakers against at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'd like to commend Councillor Thurley as well on moving this motion. I think that it's a very critical time for us to have another look at what we're up to, especially given the gravity of the recent IPCC report. I think there'd probably be people out there who would ask why should local government get involved in this sort of thing? But individuals are getting involved by putting solar panels on their roofs. Local governments are getting active, state governments are getting active. One would hope that eventually our federal government might be sufficiently embarrassed by what's going on around them that they might also be dragged kicking and screaming to the table and might in fact get active themselves. So I think in this matter of climate change and climate emergency, every little bit helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Another speaker for Councillor King.
Yes, I'm voting for this, and obviously with the recent COVID situation in the last 18 months, there's been significant issues with assets that the council has. That we don't have that many staff coming into the council building, so we're not using, that much power. Do we really need our fleet to be that big? Does everyone need a car to just drive to work and come back home again, when most of these cars are probably sitting in driveways all around Albury and Wodonga. And it's a good opportunity to have another close look at costs versus what we use things for, combined with our climate responsibilities. So yes, I'm voting for this.
Thank you, Councillor King. Are there any further speakers for or against or questions?
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Councillor Fairley, did you wish to close debate?
Very briefly, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Suchbury said it's not just up to councils or state governments or even the federal government, it's up to each of us. And I, in moving this motion, I'm looking for council to come back and report on what we're doing. And I'd hope that would say to our community, we're doing our best. We need you to help us. And in one way, for example, they can help, of course, is using our waste system properly. And I commend that. And I'm looking forward to being a member of a leading council in New South Wales that is doing all it can for this issue. So, yes, I support the motion.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Okay, SAM 10, there are no presentations and deputations. SAM 11, there are no reports, minutes of committees and working parties. SAM 12, documents for sealing, there aren't any. SAM 13, officers' reports for consideration, there are none. We have officers' reports for noting. SAM 14, 14.1, investment balances July 2021. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the following recommendation and motion. The council receives and notes the investment balances report for the month of July 2021. And I do have a question.
Yeah, I saw that. Councillor Fairley.
I'll second the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, do you want to ask a question before you open debate?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the most relevant member of staff. I noticed with some interest that there's been some advertising on our local media for some investment I can't remember the name of the company. I think it might be La Trobe Financial, but do we have the capacity to be able to invest in it with the slightly better income percentage, interest income on those funds? Is it within our policy to maybe look at the investment in those funds?
Mr. Finlayson, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'll need to take that as a question on notice. Our policy does require that institutions have a credit rating of BBB+ or better. And I'm not sure of the credit rating of La Trobe Financial, but happy to look into that further to make sure that we're getting the most competitive rates on our investments.
Thank you.
And did you wish to have
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Amendment?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Any further questions or debate on this item? Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. SAM 14.2, the operational plan quarterly progress report. Thank you, councillors. Mover, thanks. Councillor Vanderman.
I'll move a recommendation of motion, Mr. Mayor, that council receives and notes the Albury City operational plan progress report June 2021.
Thank you. Councillor Gluckin, you had your hand up.
Yes, happy to second that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to speak to that?
Briefly, Mr. Mayor, just really great to note that we've pretty close to 100% completed our operational plans, and under the COVID circumstances where we've had difficult work situations for our staff, that it's great to see those results pretty close to that 100% mark. So congratulations to the staff and the exec staff for making sure that what we needed to do in our community has got done. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers for or against or questions? No? Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 14.3, the Service and Efficiency Review Program Progress Update. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor, to move the recommendation as the motion, the council receives and notes the Albury City Service and Efficiency Review Program progress update June 2021.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Gleichen, did you wish to speak to that at all?
Simply to acknowledge the medium to long-term effort of the staff to ensure that the reorganisation of council and the components within council provide for service and efficiency and the enhancement of what we provide to our community. It was great to read and be reminded of all the list of activities and areas where development and progress has been made, and to be able to read again that it's well over $3 million that have been saved over this period of time. All of that money goes back into what we are able to provide for our community at those services and facilities. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. There appears to be no further questions or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. We have no delegates' reports for noting. And do we have any urgent business, councillors? Anyone wishes to raise before we? No? Okay. No notice of urgent business. There are no confidential matters. That completes our council meeting tonight at 7 p.m. We might take a short 3 to 4 minute break.